We are on, and I'm going to switch off my audio and video. Have a good evening, everybody.
Yeah. So anything, just tell us, Tishani. We're just switching off our video and audio. We're there. Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, we aren't starting formally for at least another couple of minutes, but we are being recorded, and the people who are already in the attendees can hear us at this point.
Okay. Harish, is there a way to take out, it says you are in a practice session. I can't get that away from my screen.
So that is actually over. So it should, go off in a couple of minutes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's gone. It's gone.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's blocking everybody's face. Oh, good.
So Zoom webinars let you do this thing like log on before the time that you start. And that's in Zoom jargon, your practice session. And you can do this anytime before an actual meeting, not necessarily just before. And then you decide at one point to start the webinar formally, at which point the audience starts coming in.
Okay.
So the practice session is open only to people who are, in Zoom parlance, panelists.
Panelists. Okay. You've done a lot of this, Peter.
Like a little bit of back stage time.
All right, we're at 1 minute past 7. So let me kick this off for now. I think we have a sufficient quorum. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for another session of Poetry with Prakriti. My name is Peter. I am hosting this on behalf of Prakriti Foundation. The Prakriti Foundation is an arts and culture NGO based in Chennai, which has since 1998 been operating in the city. It has a number of festivals and events that happen on a regular basis in the city. Some of them are one-off, some of them are regular annual festivals and other celebrations and prizes. One of them is Poetry with Prakriti. 2020, it should have happened in December, as it usually does. It's 2 weeks of poetry in Chennai, where poets get to perform their work and interact with audiences in venues that range from the traditional art galleries and bookshops and mini theaters and things like that to the unconventional, like shopping malls and restaurants and bus stations and the whole works. The idea being, of course, to take poetry to the people. But of course, with the pandemic and with the resulting restrictions on our movements and on public gathering, it was obviously going to be impractical and downright dangerous to even think about holding the festival in its usual way. And Prakriti Foundation decided that they would do this festival online, and not just in December, but spread this out. For a year. We started this in October. First 3 Saturdays of every month. Each Saturday is a different poet sharing their work and then having a little conversation with the moderator and with the audience. And since October, we've had poets from prominent, well-known names that have been known for a really, really long time, like Perumal Murugan and Ranjit Hoskete, Arundhati Silviman, a number of them also being younger poets as well, because Prakriti has always been inclusive. If you ever attended a festival, you will know that there will be the big names, but there will also be the poets who have not yet published very much. And the whole idea, as I said, is to bring all kinds of poetry and build a community of poetry. The festival has been lovely in the sense of being able to see these poets now without having to go to Madras, which was, in my opinion, the only shortcoming of Poetry with Prakriti, because it was not always possible to drop everything and go and spend 2 weeks in Madras listening to poetry, as lovely as it sounds. But the festival is now open to everyone, and I'm happy to tell you it's not going to be the only up to October that we had initially planned, but probably will carry this festival on till at least the end of the year and probably longer. That is enough from me on this right now. One of the things that Prakriti does is associate with various colleges around in and around Chennai. And we have with us Dr. Archana from Untitled College, who are the associate presenters at this event. And they have brought in a number of our students. So I would like to hand the microphone over to her to introduce our poet today.
Thank you so much, Peter. Hello, everyone. It is an absolute honor and pure delight to welcome and introduce our guest, Ms. Tishani Doshi, for today's poetry reading session. Poet, novelist, journalist, dancer, influencer, and change maker are some of the many attributes of our guest. Creative and compassionate, her eclectic and startling range of themes, sisterhood, time, memory, love, melancholy, citizenship, establishes her mastery over writing. Tishani is truly multifaceted in every sense of the word, and she has always made unconventional choices seem natural and comfortable. Her first book of poetry, titled Countries of the Body, won the Forward Prize for Best First Collection of Poems. She was a finalist for the Outlook Picada India Award in the non-fiction category. Her novel, The Pleasure Seekers, was shortlisted for the first Hindu Best Fiction Award. Her most recent books are Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods and a novel, Small Days and Nights. For 15 years, she worked with the internationally acclaimed Chandralekha Dance Company. An All India Poetry Prize and the Eric Gregory Award are her other notable achievements. Ever since our association with Prakriti, Tishani Doshi has been on our wish list. A very special word of thanks to Ranveer Shah and Meera of Prakriti Foundation for bringing Tishani to us. Legendary poet U.R. Anantamurthy famously said, Tishani's poems have magic. So I'm handing over the session to Tishani for all the magic. Over to you, Tishani.
Thank you, Dr. Archana. Thank you, Peter. Such a lovely and generous introduction. Hello, everyone. I want to just say that I'm in a place of sort of dodgy internet. So if I dip in and out, I apologize. Today, I want to read from my new collection of poems, A God at the Door, which will be published in India in August. And I thought I would try to find something cohesive to bring the poems together. So I decided to read poems that respond to photographs in some way. And I think I'm interested in interdisciplinary arts and how they work. As has been mentioned, I work as a dancer and I still perform, and I'm interested in how things affect one another. So I have a number of poems that respond to paintings, but I thought I would choose photographs. And the first poem I'm going to read is called Tigress Hugs Manchurian Fur. Harish, would you be able to share screen, please, and show us the first photograph by Sergey Gorskovs? So the next slide, yeah, if you go down, okay. So this photograph it won the Wildlife Photography Award last year. And the photographer, Sergey Gorshkov, said that he had hidden cameras for 11 months in this forest in Russia. And I remember seeing this photograph last year, and it was and remains such a powerful, beautiful image of this tigress. And it looks like she's embracing the tree. But I think, according to my more knowledgeable wildlife friends, she's probably marking herself on that tree in some way. But to me, anyway, it is a powerful, beautiful photograph of some kind of union of life, of nature, and power. And in the back of my mind, I connected it with another photograph, and we'll go to that next, which is of the women in the Himalayas of the Chipko Andalan movement, who are hugging the trees so that they don't get cut down. Harish, could you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So you see, I in my head somewhere, these two images joined together, and I began writing a poem out of that. Something about the way that these women were holding the tree reminded me of that tigress. Something about the primacy of nature, of and just of a certain power of protection, I suppose, is what connected these two photographs and what started the poem for me. So I'm just going to read the poem. The poem, if we go to the next slide, it might be too small for you to read the words, but I just want you to see that it's also shaped like a fir tree. That was partly because of the visual impact of the poem, of the photographs. So this poem is called Tigress Hugs Manchurian Fir. This far north, the sun rises and sinks in the same spot. Insects announce the apocalypse, and fog moves through all the uncountable hours like a bright gray scar. The forest is awash in a dial of light, more luminiferous than a canaletto. I misuse the words forest, woodland, jungle. Lone forest, woodland, jungle. I say canaletto because I long to be in a place of light, different from this place of light. The days are bleak and I've forgotten how to dress. I don't believe you need to wear a loincloth to prove your sincerity or know how to sew your own lederhosen. I begin my diaries with Chipko means to hug in Hindi. And even though I know the history of the eco-feminist embrace is fierce, not cute, it helps me understand the gap between my life and the denuded hillside. There are remote places in the world, Garhwal, Siberia, where trees are extracted like teeth to make way for the king's summer palace for a sporting goods company. With this new virus, hugging has been outlawed. So the picture of you, dear tigress, has sustained me more than a triple glazed room in Yakutsk. If I had been sent to collect spring water and found myself in a desert, I too would want to lie down in a pile of broken glass just to feel a piece of my lung. We are asked to leave things to chance. But if the future is really a slaughterhouse, then why not stake our territory? Imagine saying to the tree, I'm cold and alone, and I need this small fire to burn. Imagine the tree replying, come, seedling, let's dance. The next poem is inspired also by two photographs and lots of other images as well. This next poem came out of so many things, and I think that's something that's been happening in my way of writing poems, is almost that because you're bombarded by so many things in the news, it's sort of like a scattering and a kaleidoscope, and you pick up pieces, and the poem is a way of making sense of things. So I began writing this poem after Chennai had Cyclone Varda. I had been stuck in the airport for 12 hours. Everything was canceled. And then we made this drive home.
and the car couldn't go into Kalakshetra colony, which is where my parents live. And I remember climbing out of the car, and it was as if the world had been turned upside down, because all the trees were down, and there was no lights, the electricity had gone. And I remember walking home because the car couldn't go through the road, and feeling this leaves underfoot. And it was this strange feeling as if the world was being made again. And I was thinking recently now about how we use language of natural disasters to describe certain things. So for example, now when India is going through its second wave, I've heard so many times that it is like a tsunami, it is like a typhoon, it is like a storm. And I find it interesting that we use this language to describe something that actually could have been avoided or averted. And how we continue to use this language to say as if, oh, it's out of our hands, in the way that a storm is out of our hands or a cyclone is out of our hands. And so this next poem is really comparing, I suppose, two disasters, the World War II and the ruin of it afterwards, and the language of cyclone and floods. So this first picture, which is a marvelous photograph, is of the photographer Lee Miller, and she's sitting in Hitler's bathtub in Munich. And it happens to be the same day that Hitler will kill himself in his bunker in Berlin. This photograph is taken by her colleague, David E. Sherman, who was a photographer for Life magazine. And it's very interesting. Miller was one of 5 women who was covering the war, and she was the only one who saw combat, actual combat. And she was writing these pieces for Vogue magazine, which is interesting because I think we think of that as a very sort of fashion, glamour type of magazine. But throughout the war, she was sending these dispatches back from literally the battlefields. And so this picture for me is a sort of, it's a triumphant picture. They put the photograph of Hitler there, as you can see in the background, and the woman, the naked statue on that vanity. And there are these muddy boots on the rug or the bathroom mat. And in a way, she's washing the dirt off, and the boots that have stomped through Dachau, and she's wiping it away. And it's a triumphant photograph for me of the end of the war and that the end of the Nazi rule. Let's go to the next photo. This, I just want to give a trigger warning. This is a very difficult picture to look at. This is George Rogers' photograph of a young 7-year-old boy. This is when the Belsen camp was liberated. It's a photograph that was also featured in Life magazine. And he's walking past a pile of corpses and looking away. For a long time, this photograph was very mysterious. Nobody knew who this boy was. He came to represent a whole of Germany in a way. A lot of historians, a lot of commentators said this averted gaze, you know, is looking away, like Germans were looking away at what was happening around them. And very interesting that his identity came out only in 1995, was established that actually he was Jewish, and his name was Sieg Mandag. When the photograph was published, though, his uncle, who was in New York, saw him and recognized him and made sure that he was reunited with his mother, who was in Holland at the time. His father died in the camp. And so because of this photograph, he was reunited with his mother. And later in 1995, when his identity was made public, he was asked, how come, because people were saying, oh, he doesn't look emaciated, how come he's wearing these good clothes? And he said, you know, he was being taken care of by some Jewish nurses, and that when the camp had been liberated, he got these clothes from a place where the clothes were kept and they probably belonged to children who are now dead. And so this photograph is much more complicated, much more difficult. And in fact, after taking this photograph, George Rogers said he quit taking photographs because he was physically sick from doing it. And he said he didn't want to make something that people would look at and then turn the page. I was thinking again of the dialogue that we've been hearing now, and this is after having written my poem, about the pictures that have been published all over the world about the funeral pyres in India, and a lot of people saying how it desecrates the dead and how these should not be consumed in such a way. And a lot of people quoting Susan Sontag and saying how photos desensitize. And I think the interesting thing to note here is that, you know, despite the overwhelming evidence of what happened in the Nazis' death camps and concentration camps, 54% of the population either don't know what the Holocaust is and deny that it ever happened, despite all of the evidence of letters, of photographs, of everything. And so and Susan Sontag, who wrote 3 seminal books on photography, 20 years later, according to her biographer, Benjamin Moser, changed her mind. When she went to Bosnia, when she went there to see what was happening in the war in the 90s, she took her companion and partner, Annie Leibovitz, to take photographs there because she knew that without the photographs, people can say it did not happen that way. And so I think on some level, there is a debate to be had about the role of photography and what it does. And yes, at some point, you know, your 6th photograph of a funeral pyre, maybe it gets desensitized. But I think as well, the idea that we are bearing testament to some sense, and the photograph is a way to say, this happened. Not only this happened, but don't forget that this happened. So I'll read the next poem. It's called Do Not Go Out in the Storm. And again, it's a visual poem, and it spreads out across the page, kind of like a storm. And it puts together some of these things that I was talking about just now. So Harish, can you maybe move the slide up to the next slide? Harish, can you move the slide up? Okay, thank you. Okay. Do not go out in the storm. Say the words Bay of Bengal and Buchenwald, one after the other, and they sound beautiful, just as landfall does. And then imagine it, the first sign of a tree or beach after so many days at sea. We are always in the midst of life, even if we think we're just skirting the ring. Say landfall again and it means something else. The eye of a cyclone hurtling towards the coast like a planet out of control. Sometimes we track the danger for days and there's time for evacuations. Sometimes we embark on trains not knowing where they go. Often we are given warnings. Do not go out in the storm. A postcard followed by silence. Hurry, the lorries are coming. You'd better run into the woods. But who wants to leave behind the warmth of a straw bed, to abandon the flower pots and pets, how to haul the family trunk to higher ground? The days of waiting are a lull, the slow, continuous rocking of a boat. When disaster comes, there's no time for prayers. The radio announces, we regret to say, this will unfold with force. In the records of shipwrecks, my favorite causes remain insanity, presence of captains, wives, and other women, boys larking with gunpowder, Irrawaddy, Kutupalong, Belson, how many bodies committed to the deep? After the flattening, there are miracles, babies alive in the debris, an entire novel smuggled upstream in a tube of toothpaste, a honey collector's perfect machete. What matters is that we believe in our own goodness. Later, those of us who survived will drag our boots through ruins and mud embankments, draw maps of where the displaced were flung, cease to be bystanders. We choose sides in history, take note of all the broken jetties and roofs of asbestos, all the splinters of church spires tangled in electrified wire. Some of us will sit in the dictator's bathtub and wash ourselves. Some of us return to the apartment alone and find only outlines of paintings on the walls. A 7-year-old boy turns his head away from a pile of emaciated bodies. After the cyclone, I walk home, a wreckage of trees at my feet. This is how the world outlives us, making itself anew. The dark leaves beneath, so soft, so forgiving. So I think maybe I have another poem that I think I'll read later, but maybe Peter, we could get into a discussion and see if people have questions in a little bit. We can just chat for the moment. Peter?
Peter, can you hear us? You're on mute.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Sorry about that. My screen froze.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not able to get my video going right now. I hope it will start up in a few seconds, but you can hear me, right?
I can hear you and see you also.
Oh, great. Then it's just my screen playing around with me.
Yeah.
Then. All right. First, on behalf of all the people who cannot be seen and heard right now because we're in a Zoom conference, thank you for those poems. And thank you for telling us how those poems came to be, the roots of those poems as well, which we have a number of students here, and I'm sure that they will find that interesting as well. We will go into your process as a poet in a little while, but I'd like to start off by just asking you, what are the first things that come to mind in your life? When do you first recall knowing what a poem was?
I think poetry is part of the earliest sense of understanding sound for me, whether it's lullaby or nursery rhyme or just even crying like a howl, you know. So I think I see that as the beginning of poetry is like the beginning of sound for me, and it's a very primal internal thing which has been there from the beginning, and that's why I'm really, like, in a way, when I'm looking at a poem, I'm not always interested in understanding the meaning of it right away, although meaning is important because poems do help to make meaning, I think. But I'm really interested in the sound. I want the poem to wash over me. And so before I rush to find meaning, I'm just interested in what sound can do and what words can do. And I think all of us who've heard poems in other languages or music in other languages, it's sort of a sense of being awash in words, and that's poetry. And I think that's right from the very beginning, in all the kinds of sounds, whether it's the storm or the trees or your mother's voice or whatever, you know. And I think that for me, it's that very basic relationship to sound.
And who were the poets that you first registered as poets? I mean, you know, at some point when we do our nursery rhymes and things like that as little ones, we don't necessarily get that someone actually created this thing. But when did you first start associating a name as a creator of a poem, and who were those first impressions? Who were those poets that first made their way into your head?
I guess a lot of the poets I read in school, you know, Wordsworth, Frost, Tennyson, all of those guys. And then branching out from there, I think a wonderful awakening and inviting into the large world of poetry. And so for me, I suppose I would say someone like Kamala Das was very important, coming across a book of her poems and being kind of shocked and in wonder about what she was writing about and how she was writing about it. And I guess changing my idea of what poetry is. I don't think I can still define what poetry is, and I don't know that I need to find a definition of it. But there's a sense of recognizing poetry because what it's doing with language. And Kamala Das was certainly somebody who I read and I kind of made me go, oh, I thought I didn't know that you can do that in a poem, you know? And then I think so many poets have been important, you know, and again, there's this sense of creating your own lineage in poetry. You just pick and take. And then I feel like there are some poetry gods in my altar of poetry gods who are always there. And then others come and go. They're more visiting gods, you know. So there are certain times and certain periods of your life when a poet really speaks to you. And then other poets are constant. They always speak to you no matter where you are. So I'm really interested in those relationships with poets. And I think for me, that sense of, like, I also feel like there's so much to learn about poets, you know, so I don't have a sense of shame about, oh, I have not heard of this poet or that poet. I just think, oh, this is a whole world to discover.
And when did you first start writing? Not just poetry, but writing per se. When did you give yourself that? There's a friend, a mutual friend of ours, put it to me very nicely when she wrote the foreword to a book of short stories that I had edited. When did you first give yourself permission to call yourself a poet, a writer?
You know, I think that the word poet is such a loaded one. And in some ways, some people use it like a badge of I'm a poet, and other people sort of feel terrified to use it as it will chase people away. And partly it's to do with the fact that people have a complicated relationship with poetry, and there's this sense of it being inaccessible or something that they don't understand, or it's just old fashioned or what have you. I'm in the camp of people who really, you know, when I decided I wanted to be a poet, I just went all for it. And I was so happy to call myself a poet. Although it did happen that a few places I would announce I'm a poet, and then someone would be like, oh, and walk away. So I have had that, and it's fine, you know. I think for me, when I was 20 years old, I was in my junior year of college, my third year of college, and I was studying business administration and communication. And I took a class in creative writing, and it was the thing that changed my life. And I decided that I was going to become a poet, or I wanted to, even if I didn't become a poet, what is becoming a poet, publishing or whatever? I just said, I want to do this. I want to write poems. And so that was the turning point for me of saying that, announcing to myself. Up to that point in my life, I had no clear sense of what I could be. I liked lots of things, but here was something that I just wanted to claim for me, you know, and I thought, I want to do this and I want to be in this world, and I can't imagine doing anything else.
You practice multiple arts. You're, of course, extremely well known as a dancer. You have novel, I mean, I was just rereading this a little while ago, which I first read a couple of years when it came out. Such a lovely book. But, you know, the multiple arts that you practice, the living in different parts of the world, that's a crowded life, a busy life. How do you balance these various aspects of you and the place within those that poetry has? If you could perhaps spend a little time on that.
In a way, I see the main things of being as dance and writing. And I don't differentiate between types of writing, you know, poetry, novel, essays, it's all writing. So it's like that's one source of life, and then dance has been the other. And they've really always spoken to each other. And in fact, I think the writing became more real after having started dancing, partly because I got my training, not just in my body, but also what it meant to live as an artist, because I was working with Chandralekha, and for 5 years, I would spend all my days there. And it was partly to do with conversations around everything, you know, from what was in the newspaper to poetry to dance to painting to films. And it was a real education. So I think I remember having a conversation with an American poet, C.K. Williams, some years after maybe I published my first book. And he was sort of saying, oh, you're right. Why do you write a novel? And I've met many poets who feel like you shouldn't be writing novels. You should just be writing poetry, because that's the true thing. And the sense of them having been told by other people that if you want to go deep into something, you have to choose what you want to write. And I think, again, someone like Chandralekha for me was very interesting because, you know, she began as a classical dancer. She gave up dance for 14 years before she then came back and started to choreograph what would be more contemporary work using Kalari and yoga and all of this stuff. In between, she was making posters for feminist press. She was going off to explore Zen temples with Cartier-Bresson. She was going to Woodstock. She was working with, you know, groups of students and groups of women, and painting and writing haikus. And I just looked at that life and I thought, no, it's okay. I don't mind being out there doing lots of things, and try to go as deep as I can into each thing that I do. But I don't want to not go into something, because essentially I feel that these things are in dialogue with one another. And so, you know, it's not as if we are brilliant at everything we do, but if you find that you have an affinity for something, then why not explore it? Why not spend time with it? And that will surely feed into your other work. And so for me, it might be that you take longer to do something, but that's fine as well. So I think for me, the idea of doing many things, you know, has always been very exciting. And that sense of being open to things and having those boundaries and filters removed so that they can flow into one another. But in order to create something, I do think that you need to then close the gates at some point. And that's a way of, I think everybody has different creative processes. And for me, there's some sense of withdrawing from the world in order to be able to make. So withdrawing from the noise of living and being able to say, okay, what is it that I want to say? And so for me, it's always this mixture of very frenetic, although having said that, the pandemic has basically cut off the frenetic, and it's just been in isolation chamber for, you know, about a year. And it's strange because I miss the world. I miss the world and its noise. And I long to be in that restless mode also again, because I think it's important, you know.
When you speak about withdrawing from the world at some point, when it comes to the time, since you practice multiple arts, do you find that you will say, close the door on, say, dance while you're working on a collection of poetry, or the other way around? Or do they continue to inform one another?
No, I mean, I've worked a lot with dance and poetry together. I would say that the one form to write a novel is something that requires a little bit of that has to be first, you know. So I think like there's always a primary thing, a primary relationship, the first thing, and then everything has to fit around it. So if I'm training for a dance performance, the dance is the primary thing, but the poetry fits around it. So the dance timing is set, and that is first, and everything goes around. But when you're writing a novel, the novel has to be the first. It can't be the second. And so things like that. But I don't think there is a point of which you just do this and you don't do that. I mean, I'm always amazed when writers don't read when they're writing because they don't want to be influenced. So I'm like, I want to be influenced. I want to be open. I want to be having that ongoing conversation. But I think it's just a question of saying there are only so many creative hours in the day. Like basically for me, after lunch, I go into a, downward slide mentally. And so it's the morning that is the most magic and mystical and creative time for me. So the earlier I can wake up and the longer I can hold out till lunch, that's my day. After that, it's finished. So what am I going to do in those hours? That's the most important question for me.
Kind of like on the opposite ends of that spectrum. For me, the most creative parts of the thing are very late in the night. And I mean, I see a lot of sunsets, but that's because I haven't gone to sleep yet. I mean,
sunrises, yeah.
Because I'm like, oh gosh, the sun is up, I better get to sleep. But yeah, can we segue from that into your creative process when you're making a poem specifically? Okay. And what I would like to touch on that you explained with the two poems that you read to us, their genesis and what was coming into your head together. But if you could take it from that moment when that thought comes in to the moment when you say, okay, this is okay to release into the world.
It's really difficult question, Peter, because I think that the process is always changing and it's different for each poem. I feel some poems have arrived in a way that you understand that it's quite finished, and then other poems need a lot of work. But I was reading a wonderful book by B.N. Goswami called The Spirit of Indian Painting, and he was describing about how the miniature paintings, how they make them, all these processes and all these layering, each layering, each thing that has to happen before you go to the next stage. And then he was talking about a moment, the kullai, which is like the opening up. And something happened when I read that, and I just thought that there's a moment in the making of poem when the poem opens its eyes and is alive, and you realize it as the maker of the poem that it's happened. And before that, you know that it's something, but it's not happening. That opening up hasn't happened. And I loved that when I read it. And I figured that for me, especially, I think in terms of writing, because I have a layered approach, and I start and then I layer and I layer. So when I look at a first draft and I look at the final draft, it's very, very different. But some things stay, but there is that definite moment in one of the drafts where there's a flip. There is that kullai moment. There is the opening moment. The poem is alive. The poem has got teeth. And that's when you know, okay, I'm going to stick with it. Other poems never reach to that stage. They're just, you want to do something, but it's not happening. And so these are very abstract ways of talking about something, because after all, it's not, like I said, each poem has a different process. And, I think that essential mystery of poetry is so amazing, in that we go back to the page and we don't know whether we can do it again. You always have to start from the beginning with a poem. So I think that's part of why poetry has the power it does, because we don't know why it works. We just know that it works when it works.
For the younger people who are listening to this, as who are perhaps thinking about venturing with more confidence into the world of poetry, what advice, what tips, what suggestions would you offer them from your experience?
To go into writing, I would say that, you need to be quite persistent. You need to be voracious. You need to be voracious about not just reading, that's like a given, but about everything, and curious about different art forms and different things in politics and everything, just curious about life. And I think someone asked me a similar thing the other day, and I was saying something about memorizing poems. I really think that, what we're made to do in school, memorizing poems, is like, at the time it feels a bit corny to do it, but I really feel that if you're writing poems, you should memorize, so not just your poems, but even other people's poems, because I think poems live inside the body. And so when you have the poem inside you, it belongs to you in a different way from the way that the poem just exists on the page. So that's something I've been very interested in, not just in the sense that I'm interested in performance and I like the performance of poetry, and that I also miss not being here, not being able to see who are these people who are here listening. It's such a strange format for me. But I think, you need to be curious, you need to be voracious, and you need to be really, really persistent, because I think it's hard and there's a lot of uncertainty. But it's also incredibly centering in a way. It's a way to find your place in the world with words.
Okay. I see that we have Ranjit Hoskote in the house, and there is Aisha as well, two poets who have been part of this series earlier. Anju Makija is here as well. I have a question here from which sort of segues into what you were just talking about performance, and it's related in a way. So Bettina Chua Abdullah, I hope I have not mispronounced your name. Hello from London. And Tishani, this is Bettina. We had a great discussion in 2018 when I interviewed you at the Georgetown Literary Festival. Happy to be here, wonderful to hear your voice. I enjoy so much the sense of movement and physicality in your poetry. When you're writing or composing, are you aware of this? Reading your work is like watching you stretch limbs and flex muscles.
Wow, thank you. And hi, Bettina. So nice to hear from you, and what a lovely question. I think that the physicality or movement in the poem is very much an unconscious part of it. But I do think poetry is about movement. I think that there's a sense of, I've been reading a lot of Sangam poetry recently, and I'm so interested in the idea of the Akkam and the Puram, the interior and the exterior, and thinking about the architecture of temples and the architecture of the human body, and then how the poem lives inside these spaces and the movement between inside and outside. And I think that in some way, and I was thinking about my own poetic process, how when I began writing, I really began writing from in out. I was like, Countries of the Body were poems that I started writing as a dancer, and it was very much this visceral physical experience of being a dancer and then putting it out into the world, and they were coming from a personal space. And I feel like this fourth book is very much out in, taking in things that are happening around the world, outside of me, outside of my space, and funneling it back into myself. And I think that the poems are always playing on this sense of interiority and exteriority, between micro and macro, inner and outer, all these membranes, how we are essentially connected. And always there is this some movement towards a sense of realization, a sense of restoration, a sense of either epiphany or revelation or utterance, or any of these things that we consider the realm of poetry that happens in a poem, that sense of an opening, and then maybe it closes again or it stays open. But these are all things that I'm trying to do in the poem, and shifting the registers in some way so that the poem shifts. And I do that in a way also with language, also with subject matter, writing on one hand about Kim Kardashian, writing on the other, advice to Pliny. I feel like I want to carry the world, all of it, the deep interiority of feeling, of despair, of beauty, of our experience that we can't verbalize, and what we see outside. And the only way I can think to do that is through language and through movement. Only by movement can we alter something, can we convert it or transform it, and then there's a movement of emotion of one state to the other, and that creates a sense of feeling. So yeah, I think in some way that happens unconsciously, but it's absolutely what I look for in a poem as well. That sense of having moved with the poem, and poems are so small, but they're capable of such large, wide sweeps, and I love that about poetry.
That's something there that sort of stuck in my head, and Ranjit also notices this. I want to carry the world. So beautifully put. There's a question that has come in from Kartika Nair. Dance is one of the arts that exists in acute collaboration, where borders between limbs and minds are most porous. Do you ever want to attempt a similar process in the writing?
I don't understand the question, Kartika. Sorry. The same.
Should I read the question?
Yeah.
Because I'm not really sure I got the essence of it. Dance is one of the arts that exists in acute collaboration, where borders between limbs and minds are most porous. Do you ever want to attempt a similar process in the writing?
Oh, you mean like a collaborative thing?
Okay.
Okay. That's a great question, Kartika. I think I have the only collaborative thing I've done with writing has been through translation and working with translators and trying to kind of work on a text and see what happens with a poem during translation and how it becomes another creature almost with the translation. And I've thought about collaboration in writing, but I'm not there yet. I feel I work behind a door, and I feel like I need to be, I was just saying how I want to carry the world, and I carry the world through the poem, but in order to write the poem, I need to be away from the world. And so there's this sense of shutting the door and closing in and going very, into a private, deep space. So I've never had that thought of collaboration, but I haven't ruled it out. Like I said, I'm open to things, and I like the idea of it. I mean, I think about a conversation you and I had, Kartika, some years ago when we wrote emails to each other. And I go often back to that conversation, and I feel that so many ideas of poetry and writing and life are in that conversation. And in a way, it is a separate piece of art or an essay, you could call it, with these two voices combining your voice and mine. So in a way, that is collaborative. And I think those are things that I am interested in. I feel that those ways of constructing bridges in some senses. Yeah.
Ranjit has a question. Tishani, as we grow older, we find ourselves rediscovering depths and mysteries in the lives of our teachers or mentors, do we not? Which enriches our own lives. Have you ever thought of writing a biography of Chandralekha?
I wanted to do that for years, Ranjit. I mean, when I was with Chandra, I remember wanting to record everything she said. That I'd have this little tape recorder, and she would keep batting it away and telling me to stop it, stop it. Why do you need to record? So it was really against the idea of any kind of trying to capture, even there's so few videos, so few source materials, and it maddened me because I think there's an inner archivist in me, and I just felt like, I'm not going to remember all this, and I need to have it word for word. And what's happened to me as time has gone by is that I feel far from it. And if I go back and listen to talks that she gave, I feel I can find a way back into that time of my life. And I have some notes, and I have some resources, but there is a sense of having inside the body already all these layers of work and conversation, and somehow it being there and just being able to find the way to unleash it. So definitely I want to write about maybe not a biography per se. I think Rustam Barucha's book on Chandra is very fine. And again, it's something that I go back to a lot. But I think I would like to write about the body and Chandra and dance, and to have some kind of hybrid form of book, which would be befitting of our hybrid art forms that Chandra and I straddle, but in a way to pay homage to her and to that sort of that relationship that we had, and that she, the kind of power that she exerted around her. So yes, I do want to write about it. I need to find my way into it.
All right. I'm just looking through the questions. We have time perhaps for another one. I'll just leave one request with you while I just look through the questions. Aisha Chatterjee asks whether it would be possible for you to read your poem, Homage to the Square.
Okay.
Is that possible? We can, we'll come back to that, but I'm looking now at Michael RASCHID, Michael Rashid. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Michael. My apologies if I've got it wrong. Hello from Washington, DC. Congratulations to Tishani for the shortlisting of A God at the Door for the Forward Prize for Best Collection. I really enjoy your live poetry readings. What are some of your next projects?
Okay, so I have 0 projects on the burner at the moment. I would like to work on this nonfiction book about the body and dance and Chandra, and I think maybe a book of essays, but I have new poems that I'm working on as well. I think like I would at some point like to write another novel, but not just yet. And that's it. I would like to get back to some kind of performance when the world opens up again. And I feel like for me, there is a sense of audience that has changed over the years. And I feel like I need to be close to audience, and that the interaction through social media or through these screens it's something, but I feel like you need to have the embodied experience of being in a room and sharing something together. I so miss that. And I really feel that when we can do that again, then I think I'll be excited about new projects. But at this moment, in this format, in this kind of context, this is the best we can do. And it's wonderful that, like you said, Peter, we have people from DC and London and all over India, and so many people from all over the world in this particular time, which we wouldn't if we were doing this in Madras. And so there is that marvelous aspect to it. And maybe there's a way to hybridize that and to have the live and the, I'm sure that we're moving towards that direction, to be more inclusive and to be more open. But yeah, I feel like I miss the movement physical part of my life a lot. So I hope that's going to be another project. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. We all miss that part of it. And, I was just wishing that we could have, that even if this wasn't just about poetry, I would love to spend more time also talking about small days and nights, which I enjoyed so much and connected with so much in so many ways. But this is about poetry, and this is also about being at about 8 o'clock right now, where we must start winding down. We could, of course, as we have, continue on for some time, but we have to be respectful of people making times in their day for us, of people having screen fatigue. So I'm just going to say thank you to everyone who made the time to attend today, all of you in the audience. And it was so nice to see names I knew from the poetry world, people who have been personally, supportive, helpful, whose poetry I've enjoyed. Thank you for being here, Ranjit, Aisha, Anju,
Kartika.
Kartika, who sent in that message. Number of faces out there. Thank you, all of you, for making time to come here. Thank you to Prakriti Foundation for this festival, for using this time and this space to bring us poetry from all over, to Meera and to Harish, who put together this program every week, and Ranveer, who's the engine behind Prakriti, pushing it along. Ranveer gave me a copy of The Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods, which I had not been able to get hold of, and took one out and gave it to me when I was last in Madras. So thank you everyone for all of this, for this festival, for this evening of poetry. Thank you, Tishani, for making the time to share your poetry with us. And as usual, I'm going to ask that you end our evening with another poem.
Okay. So thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to end with, if I have time, I'll do the Homage to the Square, but I wanted to read the final poem, which was inspired by photographs as well. So Harish, if you could bring up the slide, the last slide. And this poem starts from a personal space. This is a picture of, on the left, the picture of my mother and her sister in Nerquist, North Wales, wearing their matching frocks. And on the right is a picture of myself and my sister in Madras at some book fair. And we are also wearing matching frocks. And I was asked to write a poem for Vogue. They were doing a book called Dress, about the evolution of the dress and whatnot. And I was thinking about how my mother made all the clothes for my sister and I. She sewed them, and this whole thing of matching frocks, I was quite obsessed with it. And being the younger sister, I thought it was so cool to wear the same outfit. But my sister, of course, being the older one, didn't think it was so cool. That's the dynamic. That's how it goes. But so the next poem, it begins with this sense of sisterhood, of clothing, and then it moves out in an unexpected way, which is what poems do sometimes. So it's called A Dress is Like a Field. And Harish, if you want to move the slide, you can. Yeah. A dress is like a field. A dress is like a field. Lift a hem and flowers will fall. Fold it in a wooden chest and weeds will lay their fingers against its cotton heart. A dress is thin. Take Marilyn, take Subway Grape, take You Must Have Had to Paint That on You, flamenco ruffle, zipper, Cleopatra in gold, lame, little, black, something. When we were girls, we played at dressing up, mum swimsuits with the built-in bosoms, a lesson in seduction. The past is a yard in Wales. My mother and her sister in matching seersucker frocks, hands in pockets, high collars, the wind making petticoats of their hair. They join a ship of sisters, mothers with needles and thread, holding bolts of cloth against their chests, thinking this will do, this will sail them across the years. A singer sewing machine in Madras. My sister and I in handmade smocks with floral bibs and frills, aspiring zazus with high socks and lacunas of knees. If I had daughters, I dressed them in velvet suits with cummerbunds so they could roll down meadows and scorch the wilds of their insides against grass. A dress needs only a mosquito net to be a bride. And later, as it yellows in a bag, it will dream of being a factory girl, a school child, something lumpen and uniform, to recognize itself in the other. A dress never loses its sense of the dramatic. It knows how to languish across the washing line, how to beckon from a mannequin, how to sit puddled on a floor. See, this riverbank, there's a row of them, unbelted, unbuttoned. The river calls for an afternoon of love, a picnic, cloths of copper maple, legs of bone, seams turned towards the sun. Nothing like abandoned shoes which glow with horror, the piles at Dachau, trains, gunshots, dead bodies and water. A dress is a forest of memory, its damask skin, its armpits of toil and wonder. Even the holes are altars to fairy tales, reminding you how once you were so small, once your waist was a secret nation. I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Prakriti Foundation. And yeah, hope to see you on the other side in the real world.
Yes, thank you, Tishani, so much.
Thank you, Tishani. Thank you, everyone.